Welcome back to Let's Get Lit. In today's video, we're going to go over Chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, take everything you learned from the first video, and now let's move on with the second. Oh, that's right. All right, we are back and we're going to go over Chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby. So, Chapter 2 starts out with Nick describing the Valley of Ash. He tells the reader that it's halfway between West Egg and New York, and it's a small area where everything is under construction. All of the houses and apartments are being built, are ash-colored, and all of the cars are gray. Everything just seems to have this gray hue to it. Above the gray, there's a large advertisement for T.J. Eckelberg. The advertisement has two large blue eyes with retinas that are 1 yard high behind a large pair of yellow glasses. Nick also comments that the optometrist business is no longer there. Nick then states that one side of the Valley of Ash is bounded by a small river and a drawbridge to let cars pass. There was usually a wait, and because of this wait, Nick had met Tom's mistress. Nick lets the reader know that one afternoon while he is with Tom and they're on the train headed to New York, they were stopped at the drawbridge in the Valley of Ash. Tom grabs Nick's arm and yanks him off the train, and that he wanted Nick to meet his girl. Nick notices that Tom is determined to have company while in New York. Nick follows him through a whitewashed fence that resembles a main strip of the Valley of Ash. Nick notices that there was a small block of yellow brick building. The third building was a garage, owned by George B. Wilson, where cars were bought and sold. Nick follows Tom inside of this small shop. Once they get inside, they see the owner of the shop, and Tom and George instantly go into conversation. While they're talking, Tom's mistress can be seen at the top of the stairs. Nick goes on to describe her figure and how she looks. When she gets down, she walks past her husband and looks at Tom and asks if her husband can get some chairs so people can sit. Why is he being so rude? While her husband is grabbing chairs, Tom lets her know that he wants to see her today and that she better be on the next train to New York. She agrees, and when her husband's back, Tom and Nick leave the garage. While Nick and Tom are waiting for her, Nick asks Tom about what her husband thinks. Tom mentions that her husband is very stupid and thinks that his wife is just going to meet up with her sister in New York. Nick mentions that it's also just a few days before the 4th of July. Soon, they're all headed up to New York together. Mrs. Wilson sat discreetly in a separate car from Tom and Nick. That way people from East Egg wouldn't see them together. While on the train, Miss Wilson changes her dress, and once they reach New York, Tom helps her off the platform. While they're in New York, she does a small amount of shopping, and they all get into a cab together. As they were riding in the cab, Miss Wilson notices a man selling puppies on the corner of the street. She tells Tom she wants a dog, and Tom tells the taxi to stop. Tom then buys her a dog, and they're on their way again. They drive to 158th Street to a large row of apartments. During this drive, we learn that Miss Wilson's name is Myrtle. Once they make it to the apartments, Myrtle gathers all her belongings and heads up to the apartment, where she announces that she will phone the neighbors to come and visit. Nick and Tom head up to the apartment, which is on the top floor. Nick then goes on to describe the apartment and how over-decorated and large it is. Everything about it is just over the top and opulent. He then comments on how Myrtle obsesses over this dog and tries to make space for him. Then, Tom brings out a bottle of whiskey from a locked bureau. Nick then mentions at this point that he'd only ever been drunk twice in his life, and once was that afternoon. Nick goes on to describe the whirlwind of everything that happened. From the alcohol hitting his system and making it hard for him to concentrate, to Myrtle's sister Catherine and her complexion, to Mr. McKee, who is a prominent photographer. He goes on to state that Myrtle changes her outfit at some point to a cream color chiffon dress, and states that with her clothing change, her personality changes as well. She becomes more boisterous, louder, and sucks all of the air out of the room. During this, Mr. McKee then states that he would love to photograph Myrtle someday. Mr. McKee states that he is a very prominent photographer and that he has taken very nice pictures in Long Island before. Tom asks what of, and Mr. McKee responds with Montauk and pictures of the sea. Catherine sits down beside Nick and asks if he lives on Long Island as well. Nick responds that he lives at West Egg. Catherine says that she was down there not too long ago at a party hosted by Mr. Gatsby. She asks if Nick knows Mr. Gatsby. Nick states he lives right next door to Mr. Gatsby. While Nick and Catherine are talking, Miss McKee tries to get Catherine's attention by asking her husband to photograph Catherine. Mr. McKee doesn't acknowledge her and continues to talk to Mr. McKeef. Mr. McKeef doesn't acknowledge his wife and continues to talk to Tom. Mr. McKeef states that he would love to have more work on Long Island. Tom then says to ask Myrtle and maybe have him photograph her husband. Catherine turns towards Nick and says that neither of them can stand the person they're married to. Catherine doesn't understand why they stay married to the other people when they could get divorced and get together. Myrtle says it's because Daisy's Catholic and doesn't believe in divorce. Nick knows that Daisy's not Catholic, and this lie surprises him. Catherine states that when they do get married, they're going west to live for a while until it all blows over. Myrtle says it was a mistake she ever got married to begin with. Miss McKee chimes in saying that she almost married the wrong man had she not met Chester. Myrtle goes on to say the difference is that she did marry the wrong man. Catherine asks Myrtle why you married your husband when nobody forced you to. Myrtle said it was because he was a gentleman. She thought he knew something about breeding, but she found out that that wasn't true. Catherine then states that Myrtle was crazy for him for a while. Myrtle says that she was crazy to ever have married him in the first place. After this conversation, Tom rang the janitor to bring up another bottle of whiskey and to get sandwiches for their supper. Nick comments that all he wanted was to get out and walk eastward, but every time he tried to go out, he became entangled in some wild argument which pulled him back in. Myrtle then pulls her chair close to Nick and describes the first time she ever met Tom. She says that she met Tom on a little two-seater on the train going up to New York. He had a dress suit and shoes on, and she couldn't keep her eyes off of him. When they arrived at the station, he was sitting next to her and his white shirt was pressed up against her arm. The next thing she knew, she was in a cab with him, thinking you can't live forever. Throughout the night, Nick recalls people moving in and out of the space, talking to each other, and how time seemed to move effortlessly from 1 hour to the next. Nick mentions that a little after midnight, Myrtle and Tom were talking just a few feet away, discussing whether or not Myrtle could say Daisy's name. Nick then notes that Miss Wilson shouts Daisy's name and says she'll say it whenever she wants, and at that moment, Tom then breaks her nose with his open hand. When Tom hits Myrtle, everyone seems to wake up. Everyone rushes to help Myrtle with her bloody nose while scorning Tom. While everyone was helping Myrtle with her nose, Mr. McKee turned and continued out the door. Nick follows him into the elevator, and Mr. McKee states that he should come have lunch with him someday, and Nick agrees to this. Nick then comments how he was lying half asleep in the cold lower level of the Pennsylvania station, waiting for the 4 o'clock train to arrive. This is where Chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby ends. So, tune in next time so we can go over Chapter 3. And as always, stay lit.